Recording in progress.
Welcome to the Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Bueno, ante todo, muy buenos días a los participantes y oradores que nos acompañan desde América del Norte y del Sur. Desearles muy buenas tardes a Europa, África y los Estados Árabes, y buenas noches a aquellos que nos acompañen desde Asia-Pacífico. Les doy muy especialmente la bienvenida como convener del equipo de sustentabilidad del Movimiento Global Nuestro Patrimonio Mundial y vicepresidente de FLACAM, Cátedra UNESCO Red UNIPIM para el Desarrollo Sustentable, en esta nueva sesión del mes de debate que estamos desarrollando durante el mes de julio. Como pueden apreciar, esta sesión se desarrollará en español e inglés y por ende podrán acceder a la interpretación simultánea en ambos idiomas. Para comenzar, quiero aprovechar la ocasión para agradecer particularmente al doctor Francesco Bandarín y a María Eugenia Sigüencia, quien tengo el gusto que nos acompañe en esta sesión, quienes en julio del año 2020, ya hace un año exactamente atrás, han convocado a FLACAM a sumarse a este fantástico camino y desafío que es OWH, en el cual creemos profundamente. También, por supuesto, agradecerle la confianza a Ege Yildirim, coordinadora del equipo de sustentabilidad, y a todo nuestro maravilloso equipo, sin los cuales hoy no estaríamos aquí, compartiendo con ustedes esta sesión y reflexiones. Tengo el honor de ser responsable de esta jornada bajo el sugerente título del patrimonio singular a las categorías integrales, del patrimonio al paisaje patrimonial, conceptos y metodologías. Por supuesto, no estoy sola y quisiera presentarles a quienes me acompañan en esta ocasión. Ante todo, les presento a Louise Tam, candidata a doctorado de la Escuela de Arquitectura de Gales, Universidad de Cardiff, miembro del equipo de sustentabilidad y moderadora de este evento. Gracias, Radium, por estar aquí conmigo. Y a Leo Viñol-Lelarge, también miembro de nuestro equipo, quien colabora como reporter en esta ocasión. Nos acompañan como oradores invitados María Eugenia Sigüencia Ávila, de la Universidad de Cuenca, miembro del panel de dirección de OWH y coordinadora del equipo de desastres y pandemias. Tong Xu, profesor de la Universidad Forestal de Beijing, China, doctor de la Universidad de Tokio, Japón, miembro de ICOMOS y miembro del Comité de Paisaje Cultural en la Sociedad China de Arquitectura del Paisaje. Pamela Durán Díaz, investigadora científica senior en gestión del territorio en la Universidad Técnica de Múnich, convener y miembro del equipo de sustentabilidad de OWH, y el doctor Sergio Guevara Sada, doctor en ecología por la Universidad de Uppsala, coordinador de la Cátedra UNESCO Retui Inuitim de Reservas de Biosfera y Medio Ambiente Urbano y presidente de Iberomap. Quiero destacar la diversidad de género de esta sesión, así como la diversidad de disciplinas, geográfica y de edades. Diversidad y transdisciplinariedad que considero fundamentales para abordar el patrimonio y el paisaje. A continuación, si me permiten, me voy a tomar unos minutos tan solo para presentar el tema que motiva esta sesión y tal vez poner sobre la mesa algunas provocaciones. Para ello quiero comenzar con una frase del maravilloso autor italiano Italo Calvino. En los momentos en que el reino del humano me parece condenado a la pesadez, pienso que debería volar como Perseo a otro espacio. No hablo de fugas al sueño o al irracional. Quiero decir que he de cambiar mi enfoque, he de mirar al mundo con otra óptica, otra lógica, otros métodos de conocimiento y verificación. Y este quiere ser justamente el espíritu de esta sesión. Como todos ustedes saben, el concepto de patrimonio ha pasado por una notable expansión a lo largo de las últimas 6 décadas. Reservado en principio a las grandes obras maestras de la arquitectura y del urbanismo, el patrimonio incluye hoy una amplia gama de bienes que resultan testimonios de momentos específicos de la evolución del hombre, como de formas y modos de concebir y materializar el entorno en que se desarrolla la vida humana. En este sentido, edificios, conjuntos de edificios, instalaciones industriales, áreas urbanas, ciudades y paisajes pueden integrar los elencos patrimoniales a partir de reconocer en ellos valores ligados a la historia, la arquitectura, el urbanismo, la ciencia, las formas de vida tradicionales, etc. Además del patrimonio natural y cultural tangible, en las últimas décadas ha tomado fuerza asimismo el patrimonio inmaterial, constituido por bienes intangibles que tienen una incidencia en la identidad cultural de las comunidades, tales como la música, la danza, las tradiciones, los relatos orales, etc. En síntesis, la idea de patrimonio se concibe en la actualidad como un sistema compuesto por componentes naturales y culturales, materiales e inmateriales, que actúan como referentes de la identidad cultural de una determinada comunidad. Desde esta perspectiva, el concepto de paisaje cultural se torna cada vez más clave y pertinente por su carácter no solo de articulador y vertebrador de esta relación sociedad-naturaleza, sino como expresión ética y estética de la relación patrimonio-territorio. Reconocido asimismo como categoría patrimonial de la UNESCO, supuso entonces a su vez un nuevo y rico avance conceptual en torno al patrimonio, reconociendo explícitamente su dimensión y singularidad territorial y el carácter de construcción que supone el paisaje. Bajo esta perspectiva, el paisaje es uno de los principios priorizados en el equipo de sustentabilidad de OWH en su mensaje cuando expresa: el paisaje es el contexto que da carácter al sitio. El paisaje es el resultado de interacciones históricas entre sus dimensiones ecológica y sociocultural. El paisaje no es solo el gran patrimonio de todos los patrimonios, también es el contexto territorial del sitio patrimonial y la expresión existencial de su cultura. Las declaraciones de valor universal excepcional deben reconocer entonces el continuo cultura-naturaleza e incluir el paisaje alrededor del sitio seleccionado. El Convenio Europeo del Paisaje, aprobado por el Consejo de Europa en el año 2000, define explícitamente que todo es paisaje y agrega que el paisaje es de todos. De esta manera, el paisaje es entendido como una cualidad del territorio, de cada territorio, como expresión de la identidad y la cultura, patrimonio y recurso de desarrollo territorial, y asimismo como un derecho ciudadano, como un bien común. Realmente me gusta mucho esta definición y por eso quise compartirla con ustedes. Pero por otra parte, si la sustentabilidad supone una dimensión y revisión ética profunda, para Flacam, como para tantos otros, también requiere visibilizarse y revalorizarse en su propia dimensión estética, aludiendo por ello a su expresión tangible y visible en el paisaje. Asimismo, hoy en día, el paisaje se concibe como una construcción cultural, cuyos rasgos más significativos pueden ser reconocidos como de valor social. Ese reconocimiento es el que convierte a determinados paisajes en patrimonio cultural. El paisaje aparece como un componente relevante de la memoria colectiva, en la medida en la que la propia colectividad social lo identifica con su pasado y lo estima como una herencia valiosa. Esta concepción del paisaje como un recurso cultural permite concebirlo también como posible de proyectarlo y proyectarse. Dice Joaquín Sabaté que el paisaje cultural es la huella del trabajo sobre el territorio, es el resultado de la acción de un grupo social sobre un paisaje natural. Así entendido, el paisaje cultural es el registro humano sobre el territorio. Es como un texto que se puede escribir e interpretar, pero asimismo reescribir constantemente, aludiendo con ello a la maravillosa idea de palincesto que incorporó André Corbós hace ya 25 años atrás. Rafael Mata, en tanto, define al paisaje como patrimonio de patrimonios, o dicho de otro modo, entiende al paisaje como vertebrador de patrimonios naturales y culturales, materiales e inmateriales. Propone así que, dada la territorialidad de los paisajes y la singularidad de sus valores, se reconozcan como patrimonio, promoviendo la inescindible relación entre patrimonio y paisaje. Por último, no podemos dejar de mencionar en esta ascensión al paisaje urbano histórico como enfoque teórico, conceptual y metodológico. No voy a profundizar en esta trascendente recomendación de la UNESCO, ni en los paisajes culturales como desafío, pues María Eugenia lo haga a continuación y mucho mejor que yo seguramente. En síntesis, se concibe la intrínseca relación entre patrimonio y paisaje, en su triple función, como una oportunidad para el fundamento de la identidad local, un recurso para el desarrollo regional y un instrumento para la necesaria reconciliación entre conservación y desarrollo. Desde esta perspectiva, se requiere por ende un enfoque de abordaje innovador, tanto conceptual como metodológico, cuyo debate será justamente el objeto de esta sesión, junto a expertos especialmente invitados y un espacio de debate y reflexión con el público que estamos seguros será sumamente enriquecedor y necesario. En esta línea, y para terminar, Flacam propone un enfoque metodológico integrador y transdisciplinario, desarrollado como resultado de más de 30 años de praxis proyectual y trayectoria académica a nivel iberoamericano. Supone entender al ambiente y por ende al paisaje como un lenguaje que podemos abordar a partir del reconocimiento de estas 7 dimensiones esenciales. Por supuesto, solo a los fines analíticos, pues la realidad es compleja y todas ellas están íntimamente relacionadas. La ecoforma alude a las formas identitarias del territorio, a la comprensión de sus condiciones ecológico-naturales intrínsecas. La socioforma, por su parte, supone comprender la o las formas que asume la sociedad organizada, sus características sociales, culturales e históricas, y la iconoforma, entender sus formas de producción y organización del trabajo. Pero eso no es todo, pues también es esencial descifrar sus deseos más profundos, sus impulsos y anhelos. Y es por ello que la psicoforma también es una dimensión clave para comprender y proyectar el patrimonio y el paisaje, como también reconocer la dimensión esencial del tiempo y la importancia de la forma de gestión u organización político-institucional y jurídico-normativo. Y es a través de este enfoque transdisciplinario y producto del aprendizaje a través de cientos de proyectos concretos de investigación-acción implementados en la realidad, que hemos aprendido, junto a los estudiantes también, algunas premisas para proyectar el paisaje en pos de la sustentabilidad que quiero compartir con ustedes. Se trata de entender que la ecoforma es y debe ser innegociable. Los efectos del cambio climático y sus impactos no hacen más que reforzar esta afirmación. La socioforma debe ser siempre participativa, como asimismo debemos propiciar permanentemente el reconocimiento y expresión de las identidades locales. Debemos promover estrategias de economía circular y el uso de tecnologías apropiadas. Y por último, debemos siempre entender al patrimonio y al paisaje en su dimensión evolutiva en el tiempo, formulando estrategias a corto, mediano y largo plazo y su planificación y manejo a través de formas de gestión genuinamente democráticas. Para finalizar, les comparto algunas ideas y provocaciones para el debate que seguramente sean enriquecidas brillantemente por los oradores de esta sesión. Los invito a definir el paisaje no solo como un hecho, como algo que está dado allí, sino como un texto y contexto, significado y signo, sustancia y forma, en dinámica permanente. A reivindicar el proyecto y la investigación-acción como enfoque metodológico, a entender al paisaje como expresión social existencial, a legitimar el paisaje como un derecho fundamental de todos. Debemos exigir y trabajar en pos del paisaje como política pública. Y por último, debemos crear y estimular redes que supongan un laboratorio permanente de experiencias con vistas a seguir trabajando y aprendiendo en pos de la sustentabilidad, como justamente hemos puesto en práctica en nuestra convocatoria de estudios de caso lanzada por el equipo de sustentabilidad y en la que participan ya 134 casos de estudio de 45 países de 6 regiones del mundo. Muchísimas gracias. Radium, la pantalla es tuya. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Lucia, very much for the wonderful introduction to open up our session. And let me just also welcome everyone from the audience and welcome our panelists here today to join our discussion on this, on the concept and methodology of a landscape approach to heritage in relation to sustainable development. And as Lucia already mentioned, to discuss this kind of approach, it's very important that we have diversity in all aspects in terms of gender, race, class, and also geographical location and cultural differences, but also interdisciplinary participation in the discussion, which I think our panelists today are in a perfect position to achieve that. And let me just very briefly introduce them, and I'll also explain the rundown of the session, and then we will start with the presentations. So first up, we have Maria, I'll try again, Maria Eugenia Cifuentes. She had her advanced master and her PhD from KU Leuven from the Raymond Ames Center of Cultural Heritage Conservation. And she both her research interests and also her working experience now as an assistant professor at the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Cuenca focus on historic urban landscapes implementation on Cuenca, which she also has a lot of extensive working experience and research experience on it, which is also what she's going to talk about today. And then the second presenter will be Xu Tong from China, and he's also a lecturer now at the Landscape Architecture School at the Beijing Forestry University, and he had a PhD from Japan in urban conservation, and he's going to talk about a different perspective of understanding heritage landscape, but also with a case from a rural area. And then we have Pamela Duran Diaz, who's also a member of our FLACAM team and also a convener of our sustainable team and a scientific researcher at the chair of land management of the Technical University of Munich. And she has also extensive experience, working experience and research experience on cultural landscape management in all around the world, in Africa and in Asia, in Europe. And today she's going to bring us some critical reflection on this landscape approach with regards to conflicts that can happen within the management and conservation of cultural landscapes. And last but not least, we have Sergio Guevara Sada, who had a degree in biology and a master in sciences and biology, and then also a doctor in ecology. So you can already see the width and depth of our disciplines. And he's also the coordinator of the UNESCO Unitron Chair, Biosphere Reserves and Urban Environment. And he's going to talk to us about cultural landscape from a biodiversity ecological perspective. So I'm going to go through the rundown of the session. So we're going to have Maria and Shutong's presentations, and then you're definitely encouraged to post your questions in the Q&A session, and we'll have a look at the Q&A after the two presentations. And also in between the presentation, we have some little polls for you to participate. And then after the first Q&A, we'll go into the second session with the two presentations. And then we'll have another final Q&A session as well, and some polls in between. And so if you have any technical issue, please post it in the chat and we'll try to address that. And if you have questions for the speakers, please post it in the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome and give the floor to Maria.
Thank you, Radium. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on the part of the world from where you're joining us today. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I would like to take the advantage for congratulate the 2021 debate team on sustainability, to EGE for the coordination, to the FLACAP network, to Lucia, Ruben, who have been constantly very generous organizing these activities. My regards also to the members of the panel. It's an honor for me to be sharing this reflection space with such a great company. So I will start sharing my screen. So just let me know if you can see my PowerPoint now. Is it sharing?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. So the presentation we'll be looking at today, it's about heritage values protection from monuments to the urban dimension in the case of Cuenca in Ecuador. And yes, Cuenca, a site included on the World Heritage List in 1999, that for more than 20 years has revealed the broadening of the perception of heritage, going beyond the limits of its nominated areas. This approach has been taken up from research and the city's management. Its results can be depicted in the inclusion of new national heritage protection zones right in the borders of the World Heritage areas. In the last decade, research has been developed and Cuenca has become a pilot city for the implementation of this concept of inspired in the recommendation of historic urban landscapes. Today, there are still many challenges to understanding this broadening of the concept and management needed in the city when it's when no longer buildings are the whole idea for protection, but the complex urban dimension. The agenda that I will be presenting includes a brief introduction to my topic. Then I will present the case of Cuenca's World Heritage Site, the recommendation on historic urban landscape in Cuenca, and some final conclusions and remarks. Over time, heritage has been perceived, and I think also retaking the words of Lucia, heritage has been perceived as a concept of importance mainly of iconic buildings or monuments. However, it's worth remembering that built heritage is only one of the categories that we can perceive or that we have classified. This classification is also now put under the scope Today, there is a growing recognition of the need to understand heritage in an integral and holistic way, where there is not only material, but the result of knowledge behind it. The use, the living essence of its inhabitants among the forms of significance. Today, with the more than 1,000 properties that comply the World Heritage List, not all represent this iconic heritage, but they are also categorized as building properties, forest, cultural landscapes, as the one that you are looking at the picture right now, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and also the category of cities. And cities are now constituting a real change, a challenge, because of the dynamics that take place in them, which means that not even the concept of a heritage are constantly evolving to try to understand what it means to be heritage beyond the limits of its built icons. The city of Cusco, for example, the one that we are looking here in the picture, represents much more than the sum of its historic center of its iconic buildings. Cities are therefore inserted in a territory in which its inhabitants, users, these whole stakeholders play a decisive role in recognizing and protecting its heritage. But in cities, both their heritage and the setting, they provide an important role in the development of a city. While cities are growing, tension can be caused by the poor linking between these two parts when heritage and development encounters. In this context, that I place the case of Cuenca in Ecuador, as in many other cities, that the development, for example, of new mobility system, tram system, that cuts across declared areas in the city, in a city which has been declared for more than 20 years already in the World Heritage List. The tramway started its operational phase in the middle of the pandemic last year. So although the process of development is essential for cities, it's necessary to ask how the demands of development can be met in harmony to the presence of its heritage. The nomination of heritage in Cuenca was based on the exceptional universal value of criteria relating to the example of the Renaissance layout in the Americas and to its city as a Spanish colony, as well as the fusion of different societies and cultures. Its orthogonal streets, the establishment of a series of churches that make up the skyline of this city. But Cuenca goes beyond that, and the Andean city located 2,500 meters above the sea level, where a series of tangible and intangible manifestations of cultural hybridization are there. They persist. It's a result of a historical stratification of palimpsests, if I retake the words again of Lucia, where cultural and natural values met. In other words, an alignment with the approach of the historic urban landscape concept issue in the 2011 recommendation. Cuenca stands out for its topography, the presence of its historic center, an archaeological area from the pre-Hispanic times, but it also is made up of its geomorphology, hydrology. We are composed by 4 main rivers that cross the whole city, the urban area. Natural features that in some way contribute and are combined with this new urbanized environment outside the city center. In the picture, you can see in the bottom upper part how the city center, this orthogonal, meets the new area with more green areas present in the expansion of the city. So a city just over 500,000 of inhabitants with a declared area with its historic center right into the middle of a growing city. The components have, of course, been studied in Cuenca from multiple disciplines, but not always in a synchronic way. That means that in order to build this bridge of connection between the different subjects that make the Cuenca what it is right now, there is already a lot of work developed from the academy. And I have to mention here that since 2007, there is the City Preservation Management Research Group at the University of Cuenca has been developing studies along documentation of vernacular architecture, monitoring. Those things have met years later. Also, the opportunity to work together with activating new networks at the international level, for example, with the WeTrap, to stimulate the implementation of the historic urban landscape recommendation in this area. So with hands-on for this work, the city became a pilot city for the implementation of the recommendation through a specific studied planning in different phases, making sure to use some of the resources already present there. And one of them was the 6-step action plan that came from the draft document of the recommendation. Through a series of activities developed, it became evident that the sequence of the 6-step action plan suggested was following the case in Cuenca in a non-linear way. That meant that this depends always on the availability of resources. For example, in the case of Cuenca, it was really important first to set up the, for example, step number 6, to make sure we have those relationships and management framework so that we can count with resources for development step 1, 2, and 3 about mapping natural, cultural, and human resources. And of course, it was also recognized that it was difficult when it comes to accomplish the whole steps, because when public administration has the direct competence, for example, to integrate actions in the development of the city, it was the weak point for us. At a local level, the academia, the government, the national heritage institutions were involved. At the international level, as I already mentioned, with the WeTrap and also with the Dutch Ministry of Education. We started to broaden this scope, and it was achieved in a first phase with desk work, if I could say, where experts from 7 disciplines, in this case, from the economy, from sociology, anthropology, geology, biology, and archaeology, they were put a difficult sometimes task, that is, create from their own capacities a series of specific studies and made the effort to map the results geographically, but bearing in mind the whole concept of working for and towards a heritage. In this way, an overlapping of these different layers created by the experts was used to identify some series of interest or areas of interest. But the interesting thing came only in the next phase, because the second phase of this understanding or this implementation was the study with the people. The gradual creation of a space of dialogue between experts, the community, and the administrative institutions. It was the intercultural, intergenerational exchange that enriched the perception of these values in Cuenca, that went beyond the ones presented at the very core of the city center. For us, it was possible to explore the multiple voices, and by using socio-praxis methodologies, people have participated in identifying heritage resources, assessing vulnerability, integrated, and even co-creating common solutions for specific needs. The voices of new generations have also been listened from their own perception of heritage. For example, here we have a really young kit that is showing the emblematic cathedral in this own way, or the mountains that surround us in Cuenca, the colorful bluff, and even the city with the traditional manifestations taking place, coexisting with the new transport system, the tramway. In this sense, the implementation of the recommendation in Cuenca demonstrated the strength of multi-stakeholders participation when consensual information can be obtained from the recognition of shared values that can change over time, but must continue to build collectively. In this sense, there is a need to move forward steps that include the integration of a consensus in city development frameworks and prioritization. That was the steps that we were weak in a certain point of the project. But to achieve real impact on decision making, we have to include the people that comes from the quadruple helix model: public administration, industry, civil society, and academics. To conclude a reflection specifically from the components of these helices, I can mention that the first point is that academia, this project was taken up by academia. But in any case, something really important came from civil society. That was the key, because not only experts, but also the city enlarged this understanding of value assessment. The recommendation still needs to understanding from public administration, because in the context of Latin America, at least from the experience in Cuenca, it has a lot of change when the bodies change. So we need a more stable and more sustainable system to be implemented at the public administration. And industry, of course, we have to mention them, not external, but they are always ready to take advantage when there is no consensual decisions taken. So with that said, I would like to conclude and look forward that this contribution also, it's part of the collective reflection. Thank you for your attention, and I leave my contacts here and the active channels that I'm currently participating in. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your wonderful presentation. And I'm sure there will be some questions coming up. And here we are, we've got a poll also for you. So that we have some time for Xuton to also prepare for his slide. Yeah, so please participate in the poll. And we've got a question already, and I'm sure you will have more questions coming. So please post that in the Q&A, and we'll ask those after Xuton's presentation. So the question is historic urban landscape recognized as a heritage approach in your city or region? So it seems like sometimes or only rarely is kind of racing against each other. It's an interesting, yeah, we can see you.
Point?
Yes, we can see you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the invitation.
Hang on a second, Xuton. Hang on a second. We're still in the poll, and I think we'll end that for now. Perhaps should we end that? Yeah. All right. Cool. Okay, Xuton, please start.
Okay. Thanks again for the invitation of our World Heritage Organization. And I will start with my presentation first, and then maybe in the Q&A session, I will give more information and discuss about some other informations. Okay, dear Lucia, William, and all the best friends of our World Heritage and all the audience, with great honor and pleasure, I would like to share my consideration and field research in the title of Culture Meaning in Landscape structure of vernacular settlement. It's a case study of ethnic minority. It's Yao, called Yao villages in the south of China. So my presentation will be talked mainly in two parts. First is a brief discussion on the landscape as a methodology, and the second is the case study. So first, I want to start with a question. Besides visual meaning, how landscape works as an approach or methodology? Thanks for Maria's presentation. We are familiar with the recommendation on the Historic Urban Landscape, HUL, by World Heritage Center in 2011, in which arose the landscape approach for sustainable development of historic urban area. And in such recommendation, the HUL is defined as a result of a historic layer of culture and natural values and attributes. Based on such definition, HUL is thought to have provided the basis for the comprehensive and integrated approach. However, in my mind, that the concept of historic layer is apparently influenced by the archaeological ideas and have misled somehow in China, following research on with a layer viewpoint. Such a layer concept may be appropriate or suitable to some historic cities with archaeological overlapping layers, like in Beijing, which was built in different time, destroyed and rebuilt in different time. But for the vernacular settlement, which is in a process of stable development, maybe it's not so suitable, and maybe it's not historic layer idea cannot explain the truth or the network of the landscape. Like in this two picture, on the left is in Fujian of China, and on the right is in Italy. And this one for World Heritage, honey. And also in the left is in Bali of Indonesia, also the World Heritage. And on the right is the case I will talk about today. So when we can go back more to the draft version of the HUL recommendation around 2011. The delete part of the HUL draft version definition may give us more inspire on the landscape definitions. HUL in the draft version said that it's the record of cumulative social experience and provides the psychic identity and social rootedness. So shall we dig more previous researches on the landscape as a methodology, not approach? It's a difference, the approach and the methodology. It's a way of seeing or analyzing the landscape. So landscape in geography research goes back to German tradition started by Humboldt and Latzer and Schlitter, and later continued by Berkeley School, which focusing on the specific social group of landscape. Such a cultural history researching term in landscape in Berkeley is completed together by Sawyer's colleagues, a historian and also an anthropology. So they work together. So influenced later, around the 1950s, influenced by the extensive phenomenology of Heidegger and also the practical theory of Bourdieu, new interpretation of the concept of landscape appeared in the field of sociology and anthropology. It which the new interpretation concept emphasized on the human involvement and thus overthrew the traditional concept of landscape, which divides the object of the world image and the human being as the observer from outside. New cultural geography also appears around the 1980s. They define the landscape as a way of seeing and representing the world, and the American geographer Crossgrove take the landscape as a structure and complex of the world. Also, almost at the same time, the British anthropologist Uko defines the landscape as a composition of human social relations. And also another British anthropologist, Tim, defines the landscape as a processual, material, and a perceptual engagement of person or human with the world. So let's give a short summary of the previous research on the landscape as a methodology. First, for the cultural geography, landscape is a structure, a complex of the world, should be critically analyzed as a text for the cultural significance of a site. And also for the cultural anthropology, landscape is a composition of human social relations, a processual and human involvement cultural structure of the site. So based on such, we can define the task of interpretation of a vernacular settlement with a landscape methodology in three subsystems. First is to analyze the concept, the forms of landscape, and the second is the structure, the relationship between the elements, and also the third is a process, how the landscape with the social structures was completely. So after the brief literature review, let's apply the landscape methodology to a case study. It's ethnic minority, Yao, and their sub-branch, Pai Yao, exactly, and which located in the south part of China, in the red point. So Yao people in history is a migrant group. In history, they moved from east of China to central of China, and until 19th century, they moved to current south of China. And even when the sub-branch Pai Yao of Yao settled down in current site, they moved from only one site, one original place, to 8 villages, and then several small ones during 13th to 17th century. So the migration history is deeply integrated and reflects in their cultural memory, such as a large number of folk literature of Yao. Their ethnic epic describe their migration routes step by step and noted their common.
连接有点问题，请过话再试。
And noted on their ethnic epic, noted their common ancestor, Yao Wang King. This is a very important ancestor which appears in many places. As cultural anthropology suggests, the culture is acquired through social activities rather than natural inherited. The central cultural feature of Pai Yao, we can define it as a migration memory, as described above, which of their ethnic group, so they need to strengthen it in customers' beliefs, social structures to ensure the relative stability of the group's culture. So such migration memory can be found among the faith, the consanguinity, and the festival, and finally reflect on the vernacular landscape where above intangible elements exist. So we take the big two and also the remainder two villages of the 8 ones as case to explain this landscape cultural structure. The two sites, the first is Youling, and also another Nangang. Both are located at the middle of main peak of the mountain branch. And the village are facing cluster geomorphological mountains. They all have cultural meanings. Just as shown in the historical perceptual map of the village, the landscape is a structure system supporting and reflecting people's relations in it. This is Youling, and also this is Nangang. So I hope to explain such structure system at the viewpoint of above migration memory. The first one is the face strengthening. As Paiyao's villages are located at the middle of the main peak of the mountain branch, I explained before, the back of the main peak is endowed with the symbolic meaning of Panwang Key Mountain. They call it the main peak at the back of the village, the Panwang Key Mountain. And deemed, this is also the materialization of the ancestor worship. And also, for each village, they built a temple for the Panwang King, the ancestor, at the top of the village, as the red point in the map. So the most important ceremony, so at that ceremony, the people, the community will take the picture of the Panwang from the temple and march or parade at the main roads of the village. So they take that like meaning for connecting the worship of ancestor to the daily life spaces. Also, for the structure of the village is controlled by the worship of ancestor. This picture shows the family tree of Youling community, in which the special fact is that even they have a common ancestor of the village, who is not the Panwang King. This is just the common ancestor of this village. But they also each branch of the family change the house of their very close ancestor, like the grandpa or something, to the ancestral house. Besides of this, each family established a shrine for ancestral templates in the living room of each house, like the red one in this house plan. So summary for the landscape structure of ancestor worship is a Panwang King mountain at the back of the village, Panwang King temple at the top of the village, the ancestral house among the village, like the blue point, and also the shrine for ancestral templates in each house, like the red point. The second one, the local belief and the sacred space in the village also connect to the central cultural feature, the migration memory. In the center of the local belief is called Dujie. It's a ceremony. When Yao's children grow to 3 to 6 years old, they have to take a very grand religious ceremony, that is Dujie. They believe that if they don't take that ceremony as the child, when they die, they cannot get the Devon soldiers who to protect them, and they cannot go to the shrine after they die. So they became a wild ghost without taking that ceremony. And the most symbolic ceremony of the Dujie is called crossing Jiuzhou. Jiuzhou means 9 stops of their procedure when their ancestor migrate from the east of China to south of China. So the symbolic name of the stops in history was written on the flags. We can see the flags. And it describes the origin, migration process of Paiyao, as well as the journey. Also, we can see the 2 Chinese characters with born and death. So it's also a journey for one person from born to death. Thus, through such a ceremony, one gets admitted as a member of the community and connects the current life with their ancestors. So the sacred space as a yellow round point is the place where the ceremony Dujie was held. It's not only one, but several. It's just at the opposite side to the village and the temple, the Panwang Temple, just among the Kasta Mountains. Paiyao people also projected the migration memory into the regional landscape in forms of folklore. Like in Nangang, they names the tallest mountain in the left picture. They named it as a leader who leads the family members to migrate. So other family members are the other caste mountains. And with all of these caste mountains, like shown in the right picture, they called it all mountains worship the King Mountain, which located at the back of the village. Just like shown in this Google map, it's like the history map. The caste mountains, and in the red village at the back is a Panwang King Mountain. So the village, Panwang King Mountain and the Caste Mountain form 2 scales of landscape structure. In the village scale is the Getangping, which holds the ceremony, and the village with ancestor house and the Panwang Temple at the top of the village. And in the regional scale, it's Caste Mountains village and the Panwang King Mountain at the back of the village, just like shown in this picture. So make a summary of the structure. Paiyao village is under the internal control of its ethnic central cultural feature, the historical migration in village landscape by projecting the cultural features to landscape in different scale and in different cultural activities, serving the strengthening of the ethnic group's collective cultural memory. So above mentioned cultural landscape is not an independent existence, but a complete network system on the macro scales, thus forming an organic Paiyao village structure, cultural special structure. So finally is some reference, and thank you for all your listening, and maybe some questions I would like to give some discussion later. So I give back the floor to Tanlei.
Yeah, thank you, Shutong, for this very interesting presentation. And so we have another poll. So this poll says, do you think the landscape approach to heritage should be adopted as public policy in your country or region? So we will have some time. Please do answer. Yeah, everyone says yes, of course. 2 people says not at all. I wonder why. Yeah, perhaps you can post comments or questions in the Q&A. We would like to know why. yeah, I think most people think positive, but yeah. Indeed, that is very interesting. There's some, well, 3 people now think not at all. Okay, I think that's, oh, we have some more coming in, 71%. So perhaps we can close the poll. And now we've got 3 questions in the Q&A. So I'll just go. So the first question, it was asked in both Spanish and English. So I'll just read the English question. So I think the question is for Maria. The question goes, why is it that culture is not being considered as an important aspect of analysis if we consider that the site was nominated as cultural? Maria?
Yes, thank you very much, Radion, for the question, proposing the question. I was actually already giving a thought about that, and the reflection goes that, of course, we did not work outside considering the cultural aspects. But I think what is important is that the criteria used for, nominate the site as World Heritage already in the 90s. Here we bear in mind that there is already a recognition, but this recognition, as you know, how it works, it's made from the state parties, and normally it's taken up from experts in culture. And of course, this information that was created for the nomination and of course for the management of the city has been gradually, or like every time, it's been updated. So there are periodic reports on the state of conservation, for example, of all the built heritage that it's here, or they have a list of these assets in Cuenca. But I think we of course consider that. We probably, I didn't mention that because as an architect, the expertise is outside that the world was only the biology, the anthropology. So in that sense, we have for sure the information coming from architecture. And I think what it makes it, what it going beyond exactly means not to see only the cultural aspects, but to try to consolidate or create this new voice of what is going on outside the cultural criteria. So people is actually seen as the way that experts saw these values of cultural heritage in the 90s, at the end of the 90s, or is people giving a new meaning to their heritage. So I'm pretty sure that, of course, the reflections that we obtained from people was more into the intangible heritage and not so much in the tangible features. So I would say that for broadening the consideration of culture, we have to go beyond that criteria that it's already established. I don't know if that answers the question, but that would be my reflection on this point.
Thank you, Maria. And I think we have another question from Edgar, which is for, I think for both speakers, it's all both relevant because Maria's case was mostly on urban scale and then Xutong's deal with mostly a rural case, but then I think a landscape approach perhaps is related to both. So Edgar's question is, as settlements grow and urbanize, how does the character of the landscape shift from natural to culture, and the cultural-natural connection, as well as the people-nature connection, perhaps can be lost in this process? So the question is, how can we address the evolution of landscape conception as these territories urbanize? So perhaps Xutong can start, and then Maria.
First, me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. For the settlement, I don't think, for my research, it's not a urbanized or urbanized place. But yes, I agree with the settlements is growing, but the people natural connection or people culture connection or culture natural connection architecture is not lost in the settlements. It's growing. Growing is changing. Yes, we don't want to preserve a site which just make it stop growing, but I mean, we should knowing how their ancestors' connections, the culture and the nature, and nowadays as a living heritage or living sites, nowadays people, how their culture and natural connection. So the important idea for the landscape methodology for me is it gives us some way to seeing the settlement landscape, not a visual meaning, not only visual meaning, but also it's kind of structure, cultural structure behind of the visual elements. There's some connections and meanings which can only get through the local community. And for me, I also doing some practice of conservation. So I agree with maybe the latter question that we can only work together with the local community that we get such meaning of the landscape. And then they tell us, not us, we tell them what kind of elements to protect, and also not only the elements, but also the relationship, like the shrine in the shrine for the ancestor template for every house, and also ancestor halls around in many places of the village, and also the main peak at the back of the village. They also connected. There are some kind of net group of nights cultural meaning. So for nowadays protection system, we cannot to put all kinds of these things together to protect it. It's tangible, intangible, but such kind of concept or idea of tangible, intangible is invented by us, by our, heritage protectors, but not for the local community. They don't understand what tangible, intangible. It's ancestor mountain. It's kind of their ancestor hosts, such kind of things, and also the Castor mountains. For them, it's kind of their ancestor moving together and stopped only at their settlement. So all kinds of things have cultural meaning for them, only for them. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very important point, that perhaps how we see this connection is changed, but perhaps not lost if we see it from a different perspective. Even in a city as developed as Kyoto, as you must know, there is still that kind of connection between culture and nature, and people and nature. So perhaps Maria, you can also talk a little bit about that. Perhaps as Cuenca coming, nominated by architects, but perhaps in the research, in the evolution, we kind of rediscover some of these connections as well.
Yes, thank you, Radium. I could contribute also to this discussion on how to address, as Eke mentioned, the evolution as territories urbanize. And I think sometimes, I don't know if everyone in this field have the feeling that sometimes we're alone against the world, because there are not so many people in the conservation world, probably, I don't know, but many are against it, or they see us as something bad for urbanization and for development. So I think something that we could really do strategically to face that is to facilitate people's appropriation towards their own heritage. That means that we are not alone doing this work or trying to fight against development, but to trying to pass the message that as long as they do a self-managed system of consensus, they can make this more sustainable and more structured over time. So it's not only us as responsible, but also making people to be responsible, and of course to feel that the heritage is also theirs. And so I think as I mentioned, these 4 helixes, there's a core responsibility. So it's not something that is only the responsibility of one group or just the UNESCO and the state parties, but I think more than a top-down, we need a more horizontal way to work together. And of course, from the experience in Cuenca, I think we are still not facing that, that rapid and really fast urbanization system probably that other places in the world. But I think we will, in certain time, we'll have to face that as well. And I'd hope that we already have these tools and people is ready to take, from themselves, take some responsibility. Thank you, Radium. Your mic is off, Radium. Sorry.
Thank you. So I think we've got about the time for the Q&A for now, because we still have 2 wonderful presentations waiting for us. So you can keep discussing in the chat in the Q&A, and we will also have some final discussion. Also, thank you for explaining why you choose not at all just now for that poll. And I think we can have time to address that at the end after the presentation. So without further ado, I'll just hand it over to Pamela.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will launch a poll while I get ready here. I share my screen. Hopefully you can see it soon. So first of all, I would like to know if world heritage in your region is being affected by conflict. And I hope that you answer that with all sincerity. So in the meantime, let me introduce myself. I will just leave that there. I will ask one of my co-hosts to end it in a moment. So greetings from Germany. I am Dr. Pamela Duran-Diaz from the Technical University of Munich, and I am here today to talk about extreme cultural landscapes and conflict. Can you see my screen? Please just note. Yes, all right. So I have traveled to more than 50 countries around the world, where I have seen that globalization, insecure land tenure, poor land policies, faltering economy, and weak governance are putting unique landscapes and forms of life at risk. Forms of life that belong to an ancient culture that includes language, social dynamics, architecture, traditions, and beliefs. So what is a cultural landscape? A bit following Lucia's discourse, a cultural landscape is a site that has been transformed using culture as a creative agent, sculpting scenarios full of content, history, and identity. They are extreme when they are located at one of the edges of development. It could be either hyper or hypo development. Extreme cultural landscapes are cherished by a cluster of intangible assets: incorporeal, ideal, abstract, intangible assets. Intangible assets might not be seen or touched. They are so fragile that even the actions to preserve built heritage can harm them. Let's take a look at the answers of the poll. I will share the results. So yes, lucky you, 46% of you live in a region that in which world heritage is not affected by conflict. Yes, let me see if I can change your mind at the end of the presentation. The ancestral forms of life present in Bandiagara escarpment in the Dogon country in Mali have been altered since 1989, when they were recognized as UNESCO World Heritage. Great Mosque of Janae is the largest sacred adobe building in the world. It's from the 13th century, meaning that it has been exposed to weather conditions for hundreds of years. Being built of mud, it has eroded over time. There was a huge festivity every year to repair it. In 2009, after a series of heavy rains, one part of the mosque collapsed. Since it is in the World Heritage List, it received a large injection of funds to be restored. The original facade and the layout were respected, but they a mixed vernacular architecture with modern building techniques and materials, more durable than mud. This project led to a temporary economic mobilization concentrated in the area. How has it worked in the long run? Well, the impact has not been as positive as expected. Restoration of the mosque with banku made of local materials, which is a mixture of soil, water, rice bran, shea butter, and baobab powder. This restoration with this material ensured the annual pilgrimage to restore the building. Thus, it activated local economy through the exchange and collaboration of several villages. On the contrary, the restoration with imported weatherproof materials such as concrete or clay mixed with cement caused the loss of the annual festival to rebuild the mosque and the alteration of intangible assets by not respecting the ancestral standards of building procedures of sacred places. Restoration of heritage with foreign techniques that do not respect local beliefs can cause sacred places to lose their authenticity in exchange for freezing a moment in time. When locals do not feel any tie with heritage, it becomes a scenery for tourists. How to prevent the destruction of intangible assets then? In the case of Janae Mosque, working barefoot in sacred places, using only natural daylight, performing rituals to sanctify the spaces that have been touched by men, consulting the local community beforehand. Without these considerations, heritage ceases to be genuine in the eyes of the locals who lose their link to the restored building. To give the mosque back to the locals, huge efforts had to be made to revive the restoration festival with local materials as in the past. In other words, it was harder to recover the festival than the mosque. Although the restoration of Janae Mosque was successful from the architectural point of view and also in terms of efficient resource management, the intervention, instead of having a positive impact in the quality of life and economy of one of the poorest countries in the world, resulted in the loss of intangible values due to the lack of identity elements in the intervention project. In Eastern Africa, in Uganda, there is a natural and rural clash with fatal consequences. The habitat loss of chimpanzees throughout the areas in Western Uganda in the form of forest clearing for agriculture has forced hungry chimps to raid villagers' crops. Small groups of chimpanzees survive in remnant strips and patches of the forest. Deprived of wild foods, they emerged, raid crops and cultivated fruit trees, competing desperately with people for sustenance, space, survival. Main driver of the conflict is that the forested lands outside of national parks and reserve have been converted to agriculture as the population has grown. Much of the land used to be private, loosely held by customary tenure. After the passage of the 1998 Land Act, which formalized traditional tenure in Uganda into deed property, people felt greater security of ownership. That security, ironically, empowered them to harvest their forests and switch to crops. Native forests that once covered these hillsides is now actually gone. Much of it cut during recent decades for timber and firewood and cleared to plant crops. Such demographic and landscape changes are happening fast throughout Tagadi district, just east of Lake Albert and the Rwenzori Mountains, and also in the neighboring district as well. The soil is volcanic and rich, well watered by the seasonal rains and suitable to support an expanding number of farming families that make a living on small private plots from staple crops such as corn and cassava, domesticated fruits and cash crops like tobacco, coffee, sugarcane, and rice. Having lost much of their forest habitats, chimps resort to raiding crops, sparking conflict. Try to imagine it. Where are the chimps? Where wild foods have suddenly disappeared. There is no forest canopy left to swing along, and the only source of food are fields and fruit trees surrounding village homes. We try to be stealthy, managing to walk upright. We are hungry, we're thirsty, and the only stream we can find to drink from is the same stream where women and children fetch water. The territorial conflict is imminent. In the past 2 decades, chimps went beyond stealing food, staying the territory, have been 20 reported attacks by chimps in humans in the western region of Uganda. The target are usually toddlers. At times, chimps kill children. In response, villagers kill chimp. They all live terrified. The Uganda Wildlife Authority is aware of this problem, but they cannot assume any responsibility. Also, appreciating a forest for its long-term benefits, such as mitigating erosion and buffering climate change, can be difficult in the face of short-term pressures to grow crops for food. Janae and Gagadi are a couple of examples of the fatidic consequences of not understanding local culture and environment when planning intervention strategies and introducing policies, even when they involve good intentions. Let's be honest, not all interventions are made with good intention. Still in East Africa, Maasai people from 4 villages in Loliondo in the outskirts of Serengeti National Park in Tanzania, famous for the annual wild-beast migration. As Maasai people are being evicted from territories they've occupied for thousands of years, they made sustainable use of the woods, plains, and waters of the land. They are now victims of land grabbing. The Maasai represent one of the largest known pastoral groups worldwide, with about 1 million people roaming across southern Africa and northern Tanzania. But now hundreds of homes have been burned and thousands of people driven from ancestral lands in recent years to benefit high-end tourists. The tensions between the Maasai and the Tanzanian regime began in 1992, when the government licensed Otello Business Corporation to organize hunting expeditions in Loliondo. Loliondo is a 4,000 square kilometer stretch of land on the edge of Serengeti Park, northern Tanzania, and near the border with Kenya. For almost 2 decades, the indigenous herding communities and foreign trophy hunters managed to coexist until 2009, when the Tanzanian regime imposed stiff laws that completely prohibited indigenous people from farming and herding cattle within a 1,500 kilometer stretch of the Loliondo game control area, where licensed hunting is allowed. On the back of these laws, armed agents swoop into the area, arresting and torturing its inhabitants, demolishing hundreds of homestays. In tourism, a major revenue contributor towards Tanzania's national budget, government has prioritized safari farms at the expense of indigenous communities. In the meantime, trophy firms are encroaching on customary land rights, since Otello was first granted 400,000 acres of land for hunting. The government has mounted successive eviction operations. We're talking about an area that was already in desperate need of ecological protection because the herds were increasing while water sources are drying due to climate change. Moreover, past governments promised that Maasai would never be evicted from their land. In reality, in 2050, Serengeti Park rangers burned 114 bomas, these are their traditional homes, and 185 more in 2018. The process, more than 20,000 Maasai have been left homeless. Now, the indigenous community faces conditions of extreme poverty and homelessness, no access to land, territories, or to natural resources. Displacement has caused an increase in conflicts and malnutrition with poor options for earning a living. In addition, the shared knowledge of the community is being lost. And in case you were wondering, the placard this Maasai woman holds reads in Swahili, "We will fight for our land until the end." These conflicts are not exclusive to Africa. Let's look at the case of the ethnic groups that live in Preilang, the Spirits Forest in Cambodia. It's a forest reserve of about 5,000 square kilometers and the largest evergreen forest in the Indochine Peninsula. The forest is home to many endangered species of flora and fauna, and to some 200,000 people who belong to the Kui ethnic minority. In fact, Preilang means our forest in Kui language. And they not only depend on it for its resources, such as resin, wood, food, medicinal herbs, but it is the central part of their spiritual life. They believe that this was the place of passage for the artisans of Angkor Wat, as it was in this forest where they found the resources for their construction tools. According to the collective imaginary, obtaining materials for the forest is not so simple. That is because Kuis believe in local spirits that live in their forest, in mountains, and near the villages of Pilang, the Haret. The Haret are ancient spirits who live in trees and help people, require people to maintain constant and positive communication with them, and to perform ceremonies in the places where they live. Haret can be dangerous too, because if people anger them, it can cause illness and death. Now imagine consequences if a tree that was the home of an Haret happens to be cut down. Therefore, whenever the Kui needs forest resources, for example, wood to build their homes, they must ask permission from the spirits and perform rituals before cutting a tree. The Haret are fundamental to understanding the relationship of the Kui with their land. Sadly, the government of Cambodia has authorized progressive forestation of the spirits forest in favor of logging companies, rubber plantations, and mining companies. The Kui are desperate. For them, this forest is life. Not only they are being deprived of their livelihood, their beliefs are being destroyed. Meanwhile, big industries are driving out the natives, their spirits, and one of the most sustainable plantation systems known to humankind. I thus invite you to take a second reading on the meaning of conflict. It is inevitable to recall how the Taliban destroyed the monumental Buddha statues in Bamiyan Valley in Afghanistan in 2001. Sometimes we feel tied up. The attacks in Burkina Faso and Mali by groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State has weakened for almost a decade the entire sub-Saharan Africa in terms of security, quality of life, and economy. Let's be honest, the region was already conflict affected before the raid of weapons. And so what I intend to emphasize during this presentation is that there are different types of conflict beyond armed conflict, threatening our world heritage, for which we should be prepared. Conflict could be a clash between humans and nature, political power struggles, contending local economic interests, insecure land tenure, land grabbing, competing land uses, social inequality, disregard of local beliefs, struggle for local resources, weak governance, lack of consultation of the local communities, and many more. Our world heritage, either listed or not, should be protected in the interest of the locals through a participatory approach, because they are the ones who keep it meaningful, keep it alive. That being said, I would like to ask you once more, is the world heritage in your region affected by conflict? If I manage to broaden your perspective on conflict, we can call it a day, because awareness is the first step towards action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for this provoking, thought-provoking presentation. And she's got another 2 questions for you. So please do take part. And so we can have time also for Sergio to prepare for his presentation. A lot of conflict is on the local economic interests. I think we will certainly discuss that more in the Q&A, but I think Pamela's presentation also addressed a little bit of the 3 not at all answers that we had just now. I think there is some struggle between perhaps a top-down approach and a bottom-up kind of problems that we can see, which perhaps from a World Heritage Organization in Paris is so far removed from the kind of local context, local interests and local conflicts of all these heritage sites. Definitely a lot to be pondered about.
Sí, nunca puede ser, yo no tiene. Sí, la última.
So now everyone thinks their region is affected by conflict. Well, not everyone, but certainly the yes is more now.
think we're ready to share the results.
Yes, I think perhaps we can do that now. So here we go. We've got 58% says yes, and then slightly 35%. And then in terms of the types of conflicts, mostly about local economic interests, followed by political power struggles and some other ones. So yeah, so we can definitely go back into this further in the final Q&A. Without further ado, I'll give the stage to our last but not least speaker, Sergio, please.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Ready. Les voy a pedir que que pongan mi presentación. Antes que nada, yo quiero dar las gracias. Antes que nada, debo pedir una disculpa por hablar en español. Pero si hablo en inglés, lo voy a hacer bastante más lento de lo que debo, entonces prefiero hablar en español. Estoy muy agradecido de haber sido invitado a esta reunión. Le agradezco mucho a Lucía Pesci y a Rubén Pesci y a todos los organizadores de estas reuniones y debates sobre sustentabilidad el que me hayan invitado. He estado muy sorprendido por las presentaciones anteriores, que han sido verdaderamente maravillosas. Pero sí debo decirles que he pasado de las sonrisas al asombro, a la tristeza, de una manera muy rápida, ¿no? Ha sido muy interesante y tengo muchas coincidencias con lo que aquí se ha planteado. Yo soy ecólogo, y mi interés de investigación es la historia natural y ambiental de los paisajes, y mi paño de lágrimas ha sido la biodiversidad, todo el tiempo. Sabido esto, quiero comunicarles a ustedes algunas de mis reflexiones y divagaciones con respecto al paisaje. El título de mi ponencia se refiere a la memoria del paisaje, y me refiero a que es el secreto mejor guardado de la naturaleza, o es la herencia, ¿no? El patrimonio de la biosfera. Bien, la siguiente, por favor. Quiero convencerlos el día de hoy, creo que me va a costar mucho trabajo porque más bien coincidimos en ello, es que el paisaje es la culminación de la biodiversidad. Esto es, me quiero referir a que el paisaje es la organización más fina y última de la biodiversidad. O sea, la biodiversidad siempre la hemos visto como las especies, los ecosistemas, las comunidades, etcétera. Me parece a mí, y quiero convencerlos de ello con esta idea, que el paisaje es la culminación de la biodiversidad. Es el último arreglo de las especies en el planeta, el más sofisticado y el más adaptativo. El paisaje es la historia de la diversidad sensu lato, tanto la biológica como la cultural. Y es la historia de la relación entre el ser humano y la naturaleza en todos sus ámbitos. Y cuando digo en todos sus ámbitos, me refiero a que la población humana ha ocupado prácticamente todos los hábitats y todas las regiones del planeta y ha usado sus recursos naturales de una o de otra manera. Entonces, quiero convencerlos de que el paisaje nos va a permitir imaginar y diseñar el futuro de la biosfera. En esto coincidimos con otros, pero vamos a ver la siguiente, por favor. El paisaje es natural o no natural. Yo creo que el paisaje es un solo paisaje. Hay un paisaje más modificado, hay un paisaje menos modificado estructuralmente, pero en realidad el paisaje es único. Yo no creo en el paisaje cultural y en el paisaje natural. Creo en el paisaje como un conjunto que no se puede separar de lo natural de lo cultural. Entonces, el paisaje para mí es ese conjunto de biodiversidad organizado de manera extremadamente fina, hermosa, preciosa, ¿no? Conocido por el hombre y no adaptado a sus necesidades, sino usado para entender el mundo. Y en función de entender el mundo está la interacción con el paisaje, la cultura, la tradición, etcétera, etcétera. Yo les pido que tengan indulgencia conmigo. Soy ecólogo, no soy sociólogo, no soy antropólogo, entonces probablemente diga alguna que otra barbaridad en el camino, pero ustedes tengan paciencia. La siguiente, por favor. Entonces, si el paisaje es el arreglo más fino que hay de la biodiversidad, podemos decir de manera muy simple que está estructurado por un número variable de especies biológicas organizadas entre sí y en el territorio a través del tiempo y del espacio. Un grupo que en conjunto tiene una enorme capacidad de adaptación. Hemos hablado siempre de la adaptación de las especies. La adaptación de las especies y la evolución de las especies es una de las líneas de evolución, pero el ensamble, el conjunto del paisaje es otra de las grandes líneas de la evolución. Y ese ensamblaje le ha permitido al paisaje adaptarse a condiciones del territorio muy variables y a los cambios que también, voy a insistir, ocurren constantemente en la biosfera. Cuando hablo biosfera es para hablar del planeta, para hablar del mundo, para hablar del conjunto de la vida sobre la Tierra. La siguiente, por favor. El paisaje puede ser muy variable. Este paisaje, que en algún caso puede ser visto, esto es el sur de México, ¿no? Casi en la frontera con Guatemala, es un paisaje que para muchos, sobre todo para mis colegas ecólogos, es un desastre, porque está deforestado, está fragmentado, está muy, como un gran mosaico. Pero en realidad, mucha de la información del uso y de la información básica de la estructura y de la respuesta del paisaje sigue estando ahí. Y voy a decirles por qué sigue estando ahí. Tal vez voy a usar solo un ejemplo de la zona mesoamericana. Es una zona que va del centro de México hasta Centroamérica, y es que la zona cultural importante que albergó a los mayas, a los aztecas, a los olmecas, culturas que fueron muy importantes para el Norteamérica. La siguiente, por favor. Bien, la diversidad entonces, y cuando hablo de diversidad, hablo de lo biológico y de lo cultural, es el proceso que mantiene la regeneración, que mantiene y que regenera constantemente al medio ambiente. O sea, es un conjunto que se basa en muchos procesos, pero hay uno que es fundamental: la capacidad que tiene de regenerarse, de reponerse, de reestructurarse o de recuperarse. Hay muchas palabras para decirlo, en un medio ambiente constantemente cambiante. La siguiente, por favor. Bien. La siguiente. tenemos la posibilidad en el paisaje, si esto es así, el paisaje en su estructura de especies que se ensamblan en el tiempo y en el espacio, va acumulando la información acerca de los cambios que hay en la biosfera. O sea, el paisaje, esa capacidad de adaptación del paisaje se basa en que sus especies y sus procesos se pueden ir adaptando a los cambios temporales, fuertes, constantes que hay en la biosfera. Entonces, queda de alguna manera registrado en la estructura del paisaje, como quedaría registrado en el DNA de una especie, las respuestas que tiene y que ha adquirido ese paisaje a un determinado cambio. Entonces, sí se acumula, sí se puede leer ese texto. Al siguiente, por favor. El paisaje es un caleidoscopio. Lo vemos ahora sí y en un segundo después está completamente cambiado. ¿Por qué? Por la intervención del hombre, sí, pero también por los cambios ambientales que existen. El paisaje demuestra una cuestión que es casi filosófica para la biodiversidad. Nos prueba que la estaticidad o inmovilidad de los sistemas no es la causa de la mayor diversidad. La causa de la mayor diversidad es el cambio, es la perturbación. O sea, el mundo vivo e inclusive el mundo cultural evoluciona y se diversifica cada vez más en función de la perturbación, en función del cambio. Entiéndase lo que yo pienso que es perturbación y cambio. No necesariamente la destrucción es la perturbación. La perturbación es otra cosa que el paisaje sí puede asimilar. La destrucción es una perturbación que el paisaje no puede asimilar, no se puede adaptar. Está por encima de su capacidad de adaptación. Pero en eso no voy a hablar. Voy a hablar de cuando sí tiene la capacidad de adaptación. La siguiente, por favor. Es muy paradójico, y aquí voy a poner el ejemplo de Mesoamérica. Es muy paradójico. Mesoamérica es un territorio relativamente pequeño en el mundo, sin embargo, tiene una enorme diversidad. Tiene una enorme diversidad cultural, pero también una diversidad biológica extraordinaria. A pesar de que es una zona que está constantemente impactada por perturbaciones naturales. Es una zona altamente sísmica y volcánica. Es una zona en donde impactan constantemente los fenómenos atmosféricos de huracanes, ciclones, etc. Uno diría, esta zona tan impactada tiene una gran cantidad, o sea, ahí se desarrollaron las civilizaciones más importantes del norte del continente, como la civilización maya, ya no voy a hablar de otra civilización. En ese ambiente de perturbación, en ese ambiente de tormentas, de movimientos sísmicos, etc., cunde una enorme población humana que crea centros culturales y centros ciudades-estado que hasta ahora nos sorprenden y que no conocemos completamente. Entonces, Mesoamérica está sometido a perturbaciones naturales, pero también al uso cultural, al uso humano, desde es de lo más antiguo que hay, 10.000, 15.000 años, ¿no? Y intensamente. La siguiente, por favor. Tenemos en México, por ejemplo, esto es un patrimonio, esto es una zona de patrimonio mixto, natural y cultural en el centro de México es la zona de Tehuacán, Huicatlán. Esto es parte de Mesoamérica. Probablemente es el paisaje más alterado que hay desde el punto de vista hidráulico, porque es una zona seca. Entonces hay una modificación enorme de no solo de la vegetación, sino de la morfología del lugar. No se distingue completamente en la fotografía, pero ahí tenemos los restos arqueológicos de una de las pocas presas, embalses de agua artificiales que construyeron para manejar el agua. Grandes embalses, grandes obras. Esto quiere decir cambios fuertes, inclusive de la forma del territorio. Y sin embargo, es una de las zonas con mayor diversidad de especies, con mayor diversidad de paisajes y más estable que hay en Mesoamérica. Esto es de llamar la atención. La siguiente, por favor. Bien. ¿Dónde está el secreto? Yo creo, está en que el manejo que hicieron las civilizaciones antiguas, esto coincido con la ponencia sobre el paisaje de China, está muy centrado en el concepto de cambio y perturbación. O sea, la perturbación está directamente relacionado a la adaptación de las especies para dar resiliencia al paisaje. Resiliencia es esta flexibilidad como de un resorte que permite que lo podamos estirar y que regrese a su posición aproximada. Esa es la adaptación que hay en el paisaje para la perturbación. Dos componentes, resiliencia del paisaje, perturbación, fueron inclusive componentes esenciales que aceleraron y que propiciaron el proceso de domesticación y de aclimatación de plantas y del desarrollo de una agricultura sedentaria. Mesoamérica es uno de los grandes centros de domesticación de plantas del mundo y creo que el éxito de ello está en haber entendido la naturaleza del paisaje, de haber entendido los procesos, no las especies, y poderse insertar como un proceso más y no como un agente externo al paisaje. La siguiente, por favor. Si esta hipótesis es cierta, esto es otra visión de Tehuacán, Cuicatlán, paisaje maravilloso. Ojalá pudiera invitarlos a ver, porque en cada piedra, en cada momento hay un rastro de domesticación, de manejo, pero también de especies naturales coexistiendo cercanamente con las especies nativas, formando todo un conjunto muy funcional, todavía, a pesar de que esto ha sido abandonado desde hace más de 500 años en sus usos globales. Quedan puntos de trabajo. La siguiente, por favor. Bien, si mi hipótesis es cierta, entonces yo me pregunto, ¿la gente mesoamericana seleccionó el establecerse sus ecosistemas y paisajes en estos sujetos a impactos fuertes a gran escala, geofísicos, etcétera, ¿no? Porque reconocían en los ecosistemas, en los paisajes, una gran capacidad de recuperación? Hicieron y tomaron ventaja del proceso y mecanismos de recuperación natural de los ecosistemas y paisajes para manejar sus cultivos, para manejar la productividad agrícola y la disponibilidad de recursos naturales a largo plazo. ¿Pudieron ellos entender que la resiliencia es la clave del manejo del paisaje? Y si es así, entonces pudieron ellos incrementar la diversidad del paisaje y la resiliencia del paisaje al establecerse ahí, la respuesta general que yo doy es sí. Todo sí. Creo que es cierto, y es lo que nos explica. La siguiente, por favor. La última, la mejor manera de descifrar la diversidad, de entenderla en su naturaleza y su origen en el pasado, es aspirar a entender las potencialidades del paisaje. Es la mejor manera de de entender el proceso tan muy antiguo, natural y cultural, que en este momento están inscritos fuertemente. Entonces, es la única manera de entender qué es la diversidad. Que en este momento, bueno, dirían un ecólogo que no sabe lo que es la diversidad, que se cambie de país, ¿no? Pero no es verdad. Todavía tenemos grandes discusiones de qué es la diversidad y yo empiezo a tener claridad sobre eso. La siguiente, por favor. Bien, ya para terminar, dejo dos ideas para llevar a casa. Una, el paisaje es un patrimonio mundial, tal vez la única manera y la mejor manera de entender la historia de la vida y de la cultura. Sensu lato. Esto varía en las regiones y en los territorios, pero es generalizable a todo el planeta, a toda la superficie del planeta. En la memoria del paisaje, en esa capacidad de adaptación, se fija, está contenido el archivo biológico y cultural de la biodiversidad. Ese es nuestro archivo. Ese es el registro que tenemos que aprender a leer. Parecería que lo sabemos y creo, después de oír la ponencia de China, me saltaron 1.000.000 de dudas en comparación con lo que está pasando en Mesoamérica. Estamos entendiendo muy poco todavía. Creo que tenemos el archivo y tenemos el libro. Usémoslo. Intentemos, pero no contemos las especies. Hablemos de los procesos y ahí entenderemos la mitología, la cosmología de la cultura y podremos, de alguna manera, tener una pequeña máquina del tiempo que nos permita mover desde el pasado y proyectarnos hacia el futuro con una visión humilde, pero sólida sobre lo que somos, lo que fuimos, lo que somos y lo que podríamos volver a ser. La siguiente, por favor. Bueno, eso es todo. Muchas gracias otra vez por la oportunidad de participar aquí. Espero no haberlos aburrido con estas deliberaciones. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Sergio. And we've got another poll. And can I just say, it's far from boring us. And I think it's a perfect presentation to tie up our session today. What you have talked about speaks a lot to sustainability, the idea of resilience, supported by diversity, and also the idea of understanding these associations between different elements in a landscape, regardless of even dissolving the divide of culture and nature, which we can see also from Xu Tong's case as well. And in terms of resilience, in terms of how the local community can be more resilient against conflicts that Pamela has talked about, and also evolution, regardless of an urban or rural landscape. It's really just crucial. So please do take some time to answer the poll. And we do have a little bit more time for discussion if the audience would like to stay just a few more minutes, so we can have some more time for discussion and some questions as well. So for the poll, it looks like most people think about landscape approach still perhaps more from an environmental sustainability point of view. But it's more or less all quite more or less the same actually.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah, so perhaps Pamela, if you want to close it at any point, we can do that. So perhaps we can move on to, we do have one question from the audience, from Fabian to everyone, whoever wants to answer. So the question is, how do you think that new cities have attached themselves to cultural heritage? Perhaps Maria, Pamela, go on.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very interesting one, because normally that cities don't work as newly built in the territory. They act as a palimpsest. So they act in the sense of a patchwork where they attach and evolve in different ways, and they overlap. But actually some cases, very few cases in the world where cities were built anew in let's call it a deserted land, although there was normally some other lives of some other forms of life there. And what I can recall is, for example, case of Chandigarh was built at the late 1940s by Le Corbusier, who designed this as a symbol of unification of India. At the moment, it created, yes, a lot of expectation, and there were a lot of hopes regarding the design. It was innovative. He was trying to prove this zoning type of design for cities for a decade at least already. He tried to test it in Europe, and people were not really convinced about it, and he got for the first time the chance to try it in Chandigarh. How has it worked 70 years later? Well, I would have to call it a monumental fossil, because the original purpose, which was administrative, yes, it doesn't serve in the current political circumstances. So it stands now as a moment frozen in time, while this rigid grid that he designed for the city is not really attached to the local culture. So outside of this rigid grid for administration, now that the administrators are not really there or don't have the power that they had 70 years ago, yes, it's all created in the Indian way as before. So it's not like how new cities attach to the local or to the cultural landscape, but how cultural landscapes manage to take over cities. I hope I managed to answer the question.
Certainly. Is anyone else wants to respond to that question? So, yeah, please, Sergio, go on.
Sí, ¿puedo?
Adelante.
Mira, creo que el asunto de las ciudades y el paisaje, ¿no? Quisiera decir una cosa, tenemos un problema de separación de los paisajes urbanos, antiguos y nuevos, y los paisajes rurales y naturales. Creo que estamos cometiendo el error de crear categorías de paisaje. Uno de nuestros grandes retos es crear un paisaje continuo, que el paisaje urbano esté vinculado y continuo con el rural e inclusive con el natural. Las especies se mueven, la gente se mueve, el conocimiento surge de todos lados. Tenemos que lograr un paisaje, una visión, una percepción del entorno común, que la gente de las ciudades tenga una percepción de su región, que la región se incorpore sus aspiraciones en las ciudades. Porque si el paisaje es servidor de lo urbano, en ese momento hay un conflicto inmenso que no vamos a poder resolver. Tenemos que sensibilizar a las ciudades, sus ciudadanos, de que formamos parte de un solo paisaje regional, que puede ser más grande o más chico, dependiendo de la visión que nosotros podamos tener de ello. Nada más.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think there is a Spanish question in the Q&A. Perhaps could someone help me with that?
I just want to translate it. It's not a question, it's just congratulations to Sergio Guevara for his presentation, and are sending him greetings from Formosa, and yes, the north side of Argentina, who is celebrating today its independence.
Yeah, congratulations then. So Pamela, perhaps do you want to answer the next question about in terms of conflicts in relation to time, how it might evolve, how it might accelerate it, or how it might, you know, be managed from Susan?
Yes, gladly. I was planning to answer that typing because of the time, but thank you very much, Susan, for this very good question. I think what we need to do is make an iterative process on how conflict is being managed, and if it responds to the local needs or not, and what other kinds of conflicts are rising as a response to these addresses. So we have to make a series of observations over time to assess the compliance with or the achievement of certain standards or certain objectives. I think that there are also certain steps towards addressing conflict, and it's a cycle. So we can create awareness, we can have different researchers involved, but we also need to have different stakeholders involved. And from that, we need to to create certain approaches or feasible solutions to conflict, and then there is this endless negotiation trying to address everyone's needs. So it's an iterative process, and I hope I answer to this very provocative question. She also talks about Canada and the violence against Indigenous people, and I think this could only be prevented when all stakeholders are involved and when awareness is raised.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I think we're all buzzing with questions and reflections at this point. We don't really want the session to end, but unfortunately, we're out of time. So I'm just gonna thank everyone for participation, thank our panelists for presenting such wonderful presentations. And I have such a joy joining and moderating this session. And I'm just gonna hand my stage back to Lucia to conclude this session.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos por el esfuerzo, por la activa participación de todos los que nos están acompañando de todas partes del mundo. Para concluir, quiero por supuesto agradecer muy especialmente a Luis Tam por la maravillosa moderación de este evento, a Leo Viñol también, que nos está acompañando detrás de escena como reporter, por supuesto también a María Eugenia Sigüencia, a Pamela, que es una amiga y convener, y muy especialmente también a mi amigo y maestro, el doctor Sergio Guevara Sada. También quiero agradecer el esfuerzo de nuestras intérpretes, Marisa y Florencia, y por supuesto a todos ustedes que nos están acompañando y nos han acompañado tan activamente en esta sesión. Para concluir, porque aquí nada termina, tenemos todavía un largo mes de debate del equipo de sustentabilidad. Quiero compartir con ustedes este cronograma de las sesiones que continúan. Mañana tenemos una excelente sesión, un segundo foro indígena, y por supuesto a invitarlos muy especialmente a que nos acompañen en las sesiones que siguen y nos acompañen también a través, siguiéndonos en nuestras redes sociales. Esto es todo por hoy. Muchísimas gracias a todos por acompañarlos y muy buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches a todos. Gracias a todos.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias, Sergio, Pamela, María Eugenia,
Bye bye,
Leo,
thank you.
Marisa.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Adiós.
Y gracias a los que nos están acompañando, por supuesto.
Desde luego.
I think perhaps some of the audience were asking about the poll results. Perhaps we can publish that, after the session somehow. So stay tuned to our social media and follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you, Radio.
See you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.